paper, from recycled paper. There we go. So the first thing that you're gonna need inside of your kit, you have a mold and a decal. Your mold is the one with the screen, your decal is without the screen. You're also going to be getting a sponge. Your sponges are a lot nicer than mine. You also are probably going to be getting a little thing of paint. Things that you're gonna need outside that we didn't provide in the kit is a blender or a potato masher, a bin that has water in it, and then towels or paper towels. Either one is fine. So the first step is you're gonna take all of your paper and you're gonna cut it into cubes or squares. Just kind of cut it smaller. You can cut it or you can tear it, either way is fine. And then you're gonna submerge it in water. I like to reuse cups that I got from restaurants because I don't like it to spill overnight. But as long as you make sure that your paper is wet, that's the most important part. Next, you're gonna put it in your blender. My fun little craft blender. Like I'm back in lab. And then you're gonna blend it until it's a uniform pulp. Sometimes you have to move it around a bit because it gets stuck. Might need some more water. That's why I've got my bin.
So what consistency are we looking for?
We're looking for a pulpy kind of mash. We want all of the pieces to be uniform. It doesn't necessarily want to look like pieces of paper anymore.
So I noticed you've got paper in there that's got writing on it, and it's like, it doesn't matter at all what it looks like before we cut it up?
Yeah, so I tend to, it all depends on what kind of paper you want. So I like to separate out my dyed paper. I only have white paper right now, but I tend to separate out my different colored dyed paper because dyed paper may dye your paper when you're doing the process. But if you don't really care about the color, or if you just want it to be whatever color, then it doesn't really matter what's on it.
Okay.
Here we go. Sometimes she just needs a little bit of help. So you're going to want to blend it or mash it with your potato masher or food processor until it looks kind of like a milkshake and it kind of all looks very uniform. Now, since I mainly use white paper, this is going to look white. If I don't put any paint in it, it's going to end up either white or gray. If you have multiple different colored papers in there, it might end up looking more brown. So next, we're going to take our bin, and if you want to add paint, this is where I would add it. Okay. So I'm gonna add some red, and then I'm just gonna add some, I use the end of my paintbrush.
So tell us what kind of paint we're using.
This is washable paint. You can use acrylic. Just depending on the type of paint that you use, you may need to strain it out of your water before you put it down the drain. Or if it's like watercolor, you're gonna need a lot more to make it opaque. But you want to make sure to get that paint in there and make sure there's no chunks of paint left in here. I just use kids' washable paint. So this is like finger paint because it's cheap at the dollar store.
Okay, so when we process our paper in here, is it just going to be kind of dyed like this color? Is it going to come out bright? Or is this darker than what our final product is going to be?
So this color right now, what it is, it's going to end up being lighter on your paper because the paper is white, and we'll also be adding in more water from the pulp. So it'll make it more translucent and more pastel. But if you want it to be a brighter, darker color, you will need to add more paint to the water, as much as you can go. Okay, now I just got to use my hand. Okay, so next what you're gonna do is I like to take one handful of pulp at a time and add it to the water and then mix it around. So you wanna spread it all out. And if you find big pieces like this, that's okay. You just might want to take it out unless you want it in your paper. Some people like bigger pieces in their paper. I like my paper to look pretty uniform.
So the smaller the piece of paper, the more smooth your paper is.
Yeah.
So you're just breaking up all of the lumps, I guess?
Yeah, just making sure there's no huge clumps. If I don't want it in there, then I can either tear it up in there or I can scoop it out. Either one is fine. Alrighty, I'm gonna add one more just because I want to make sure my screen's covered.
So we're making pages that are about like 5 by 7 final
Yeah.
product, right? So could you keep putting in more paper and make a bigger sheet of paper?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you're gonna probably, if you want a bigger sheet of paper, you'll want bigger frames. Or you could even go smaller, either way is fine. Just remember that when you're adding pulp, that however thick your pulp is how thick your paper is gonna come out. So I tend to like thinner paper, but some people like really thick paper. So next we're gonna make sure that our towel is ready. So we're gonna wanna roll out our towels or a towel, whatever you have on hand, either one is fine. And that'll be ready for us when we are ready to put down our paper. So this is your decal and this is your mold. And so you're gonna wanna put your decal on top, no screen, and then screen on bottom. And you're gonna wanna hold them really close together. Then you're gonna go into your water and scoop. And then come out. And you're gonna let it drain. Alrighty. Then when you've drained out plenty of water, you'll take your decal off and set it to the side. And then you're gonna flip it over onto your paper. It's okay if it gets wet, that's not a big deal. Next, you're gonna take your sponge and you're gonna lightly dab the excess water out.
So is the idea here to get it like completely dry? Because there's a lot of moisture in there.
Yeah, so you're not gonna get it completely dry, you're gonna have to let it dry afterwards. But you're trying to get as much moisture out of it as you can right now. Because when you get the moisture out, then the paper's gonna wanna stick to itself and stick to the, whatever you're putting it on. So I kinda go over it a couple times until there's not a ton of water squeezing out. All right. Next is probably the most difficult part. You're gonna wanna pull your mold up, and that's the part where you're probably gonna get some tears. It's okay if you tear, if you decide that you don't want that piece of paper, you can take this pulp as it is right now and put it back in here and mix it in. So that's completely reusable. What you wanna do is very carefully lift, and this takes some practice, and I still even sometimes struggle with it. Carefully lift it up. You're gonna leave that paper alone and let it dry for 24 hours, and then it's a piece of paper. It's ready to be written on.
So I noticed it's kind of buckling up here. Do we need to flatten this out, or is it gonna flatten out on its own as it dries?
So it'll likely buckle by itself. You can add weight on top, so you can add some like parchment paper and then put a book on top while it dries, or you can wait for it to dry completely and take a iron and put parchment paper on top and then iron it out yourself to make it more flat. I often use pressure because I don't want to have to pull out my iron all the time, but those are both two different ways you can do that.
So this might be a dumb question, but it's not going to stick to the paper towel as it dries?
It will stick some, but it won't stick enough to tear. So I usually use a towel or canvas. Those tend to be a bit easier, but it will stick a little bit, but it will pull away over time. So.
All right, Kaylee, I'm really excited by this pink paper, but I would really like to see what else you can do. I know you mentioned that there are ways to make like different patterns with the colors. So let's see what we can do.
So I call it gradient paper. I'm sure there's a better name for it. But you can also, if you have more than one tub and more than one paint, you can make paper that has 2 different colors in it. So you would do the same thing. You would add your paint. So I'm going to use orange this time into your tub, which might take a second.
So do your colors need to be similar to each other, or could we do like a black and a pink?
Oh yeah, you can do whatever colors you want. They don't have to blend. I like when they're kind of similar because then there's like that middle and then it's kind of pretty. But you can use whatever colors you like. You can go green and orange or whatever colors that you want. It's your paper. And then you do the same as you did for your other one. You take your pulp and you mix it in.
So is it possible to put too much paper into the water for this stuff?
Unless you, I mean, you could technically, depending on how thick you want your paper. If you want it really thick, you could put a ton of pulp in there. But since I like my paper really thin, I could definitely put too much in there and make my paper too thick.
And I guess it'd be really clear if you didn't have enough, because when you put the frame through there, you would have holes in your paper, right?
Yeah, so you would have a ton of holes in your paper, or you would not have a consistent evenness across, and then that makes it really hard when you're pulling up because then it's going to tear. So next we're going to slide this one over, and then I'll just have to rotate them. But depending on what you want to do, I'm going to do one side and then the other side. So the first, I'm going to go in one way, and I'm only going to go about halfway up. See, that's not enough pulp for me, so I'm going to wipe it away, and I'm going to dunk it, and then the pulp's just going to go back into the water, so I can retry again. So I'm going to go in again, and so I'm going to go with the bottom, and then try and cover this bottom half here. There's that. And then I'll reach to the front one and do the same thing, just on the opposite side. And it's gonna mess up sometimes, but that's okay. And then this paper may be a little bit more thin than our last one, and if it tears, then we'll have a good example of when we can just go back and try again.
Yeah, because we didn't add any more paper to the
Yeah.
one.
Let's see if it'll come up. All right, moment of truth. Ready? There we go.
That's so cool. So I see what you were talking about with the larger chunks of paper where you can see them. But like where these were like really ground up fine, it really takes the color really well.
Oh yeah, for sure. And then it's always just a practice. You figure out how much you want to blend, and if you don't want to blend too much, if you like the bigger pieces, then that's totally fine. It's just up to you what you want in your paper. So once it's all dry, this is a smaller piece of paper that I've made, but they'll kind of look like this. And then you can use it either for crafting or bullet journaling, or I've even made a notebook with it that I've bound together, filled with paper that I've made. So with this kind of paper, it might be harder to write with a fine point pen on it, so I would recommend a felt tip pen.
So I'm really excited about this. This was a lot of fun. Thanks for showing us how to do it, Kaylee.
Yeah, of course. And if you have any questions, you can definitely email us, and we'll try our best to help you out. Thank you for coming and making this craft with me.